It was a brutal weekend for injuries. Let's break them all down. Up next on Fantasy Baseball Today Express. Welcome into FBT Express on Monday, March 10th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White. Friday night, we got some big news, Scott. Gerrit Cole apparently was undergoing tests on his right elbow, and Cole said Saturday that he was concerned about what the imaging would show. And just a few hours before recording this, Jim Bowden sent out a tweet. According to a source, Gerrit Cole has been recommended to have Tommy John surgery, but they are now waiting for a second opinion to confirm the diagnosis. So, Scott, this looks like a pretty grim situation. I'm assuming Gerrit Cole is just off our board for fantasy this season.
Yeah, so I mean, he is getting a second opinion. It's not official he will have Tommy John surgery, but usually the alternatives to that are some other kind of surgery or a lengthy rehabilitation that may just be putting off surgery. And yeah, it doesn't sound good. I just went ahead and moved Gerrit Cole off my draft board, and I'll adjust up if I need to, but I don't think I'm going to need to. I think he's just out of our plans for this year, which is unfortunate, but better to know in early March than early April, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, my condolences to those who might have drafted him already. Some big drafts have already happened and are currently going on right now. So I do apologize if you drafted Gerrit Cole. Of course, he dealt with a right elbow injury last season, and so it just the writing seems to be on the wall here with this injury. The updated Yankees rotation: Max Fried, Carlos Rodon, Clark Schmidt, Marcus Stroman, and I think Will Warren, who was a prospect of note in recent years. Scott, do you have any interest in Will Warren, maybe as a deep sleeper?
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of interesting. He's had some big strikeout numbers in the minors. He's had a really good spring, and I think there was talk of him. Was it a curveball that he's added? Something that has them kind of excited in Yankees camp. There are a lot of pitchers who've drawn attention to themselves, who've raised my interest, let's say, this spring beyond Will Warren. So I think in most leagues, I'm not going to get around to drafting Warren, but he's a name worth knowing.
All right, let's move on to George Kirby, who's been shut down from throwing due to right shoulder inflammation and will begin the season on the injured list. And pitcher injuries, you just never know, because George Kirby was among the most reliable pitchers the past few years, and now he's hurt. Scott, how far did you lower George Kirby in your rankings?
I moved him to 24th. That would be between Spencer Strider and Justin Steele, both of whom I'm a little higher on than the consensus. It also means he's ahead of Spencer Schwellenbach for me. So it's still, you know, he needs to be drafted pretty early. The timetable for this sounds like a short one. They're hoping, the Mariners are hoping 10 days, 2 weeks into the season, he'll be ready to return. The injury doesn't sound serious. But any time you're messing with the pitching arm, even if it's not a serious injury, just the biology there is so complicated. And if it costs him any velocity, if it leads him to adjust his mechanics in some subconscious way that then causes another injury, none of that would be surprising. You just hate for there to be any kind of injury. But on the surface, at face value, this doesn't seem serious for Kirby, and so I don't want to go overboard in downgrading him. Be cautious and understand you can't take too many of those risks in your draft. But there's a good chance come May he has a couple starts in the bag already, and none of us are thinking about this injury anymore.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.
Who's in? Who's out? Let the madness begin. The NCAA Men's Basketball Championship Selection Show on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
Welcome back in FBT Express. As I mentioned, a rough weekend for injuries, specifically in New York. Both baseball teams have dealt with a lot of injuries this spring, and Francisco Alvarez has been diagnosed with a fractured hamate bone in his left hand and will miss 6 to 8 weeks. Luis Torrens will slot in as the Mets starting catcher. Scott, is Alvarez still worth drafting in a league with IL spots? And do you have any interest in Luis Torrens in a deeper two-catcher league?
I wouldn't bother with Francisco Alvarez in a one catcher league, even with IL spots, because he wasn't definitively a top 12 catcher for me. I've moved him down to 22. So if it's a 2-catcher league that has IL spots, probably you draft him late there and hope he's back closer to the end of April than the end of May. But there's also, broken hamate bones. There's a chance the power won't be all the way back when he does return. So you can't even be completely sure what you're getting. Torrens, I don't have much interest in at all.
All right. Well, we do have an update on the Grayson Rodriguez situation. Remember last week, the velocity was down for Grayson Rodriguez, and he gave us some kind of excuse. Next thing you know, he's shut down with an injury. They say it might be a triceps injury. Now he's been diagnosed with right elbow inflammation and will be shut down from throwing for 7 to 10 days. He also received a cortisone injection, Scott. So how low have you dropped Grayson Rodriguez in the rankings?
So I said I moved Kirby to 24. I've moved Grayson Rodriguez to 54 to provide some perspective on that. It puts him one spot behind spring sensation Gavin Williams. It puts him one spot ahead of Sean Manaea, who is also beginning the year on the IL for an oblique issue. And I ranked those two healthy when they were both healthy. Rodriguez and Manaea, I ranked them similarly. I think the timetable is about the same for both. No structural damage in Grayson Rodriguez's elbow. That's good news. Inflammation, it might be gone within a week, especially with his injection, and he's back to throwing, and good chance he's back before the end of April. In fact, I think that's the likeliest scenario for Grayson Rodriguez. But as I said with George Kirby, anytime you got something going on in your pitching arm, even if it doesn't seem serious on the surface, it can lead to other things. So I try to rank them in a way that demonstrates an abundance of caution. Because, of course, if both Kirby and Rodriguez are back before the end of April, then they deserve to go higher than 24th and 54th among pitchers, respectively. But you have to guard against that worst case scenario.
All right. Lastly, we did get to updates on outfield injuries. Brandon Nimmo received a gel injection Friday as he's dealing with knee inflammation. He also does still have the plantar fasciitis from last year. And Jurickson Profar was diagnosed with a bone bruise in his left wrist Sunday, but is expected to be ready for an opening day. Pretty nasty looking injury there with Profar. Surprised this was the only diagnosis here. Scott, are you lowering either Brandon Nimmo or Jurickson Profar?
I was higher on them, on both of them, than the consensus. Maybe I'm more inclined to draft them where the consensus is drafting them now. Interestingly, during my TGFBI draft going on currently, Nimmo went about the same point he always goes. And, they did rule out structural damage in the knee, so you could look at that as good news. They're still saying he should be ready for opening day. I'm probably not going. Well, I already did lower Nimmo a tier in my rankings to the same tier as Profar, and I think they probably deserve to go on about on equal footing now. I think maybe the Profar injury needs a little more attention. A bone bruise in the wrist. If you saw the injury happen on a diving attempt in left field, where his glove, the fingers kind of caught on the ground and bent the wrist backwards, it looked like he'd broken something or torn some ligaments. He seemed to be in a lot of pain. X-rays, MRI ruled that out, but bone bruise, sometimes that ends up not being a big deal. Sometimes it can sideline a player for weeks and weeks beyond what the team originally estimates. And so they're saying Profar will be ready for opening day, but with as much pain as he seemed to be in, and just given the nature of that injury, I'm not totally sure about that. I think I'm a little more worried about Profar's availability for opening day than Nimmo's. And also, even if Profar's ready to go in theory, risk's pretty important to hitting. And we already had doubts about his ability to sustain last year's breakout. So maybe we'll look back at September on a bad year for Profar and say, well, of course he had a bad year. Look at that wrist injury he suffered at the start of the year. So I kind of want him at a discount at this point. I think you can definitely get Nimmo at a discount. I think it's too early to know if you can get Profar at a discount.
All right. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to our full-length podcast, Fantasy Baseball Today, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today Express, and we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.